Tianbao Fu Yao Lu. Chapter 191. Reinvestigating Tianluo. Hung Jun brought the pheasants and carp yao along as they charged in. Ever since the Battle of Chang'an, Hung Jun could fly, and when he sensed the shaking inside the mountain, he immediately woke and hurried over to see what was happening. For a time, the Yaoguai all shouted their war cries, and the pheasants came charging ahead, flying towards them gracefully, while the carp yao carried a wooden pole, lifting it above its head as it hurried to help out in the fight. With that, the pheasants went fleeing away the same way they came, and the carp yao leaped into the water, not daring to even peep its head out. Hung Jun grabbed Li Jinglong's arm and lifted them both high into the air. Li Jinglong shouted, "Watch out above you." The boss snake moved, and the array reacted to that. The stalactites hanging from the roof of the cavern swiftly plummeted downwards, before the boss snake's tail lifted into the air. Hung Jun had just activated the pentacolor sacred light when he took a hard blow, and he almost spat up blood. Li Jinglong went flying backwards, and in midair, he turned, kicking off the falling stalactites like they were rungs on a suspended ladder. He then quickly leaped towards it, shouting, "Let's talk things out." Boss snake. The boss snake, however, was very infuriated. It let out several roars, and the stalactites continued to fall, creating a solid prison that trapped them. Hung Jun called up the glaive, and with a slice, sent an arc flying through the air. That arc swept past in a gust of wind, but the boss snake, as it roared, spewed green poison mist out of its mouth, which filled the entire underground cavern. Amidst the fog of poison, fresh blood sprayed. As soon as Hung Jun smelled the sweet coppery tang, he felt his head spin, and he shouted, "Go!" He then leaped forward, grabbed Li Jinglong, and dashed out of the cavern. Zhao Yun still inside. Li Jinglong shouted, "We can't beat it." Hung Jun shouted back, "It's too powerful. We have to figure out something first." The two of them dashed out of the mountain, sliding all the way down as they fell onto the ground. The pheasants flew over, but just as they were about to comfort Hung Jun, he waved a hand, indicating that none of them should make a sound. He immediately pulled down Li Jinglong's bottom eyelid, checking how heavily poisoned he was. Thankfully, the two of them had only breathed in a little bit of the poison fog, and they were not heavily poisoned. Even then, Hung Jun still felt his head spinning, and a faint sense of nausea rose in his chest. Li Jinglong drank some of the creek water, before turning on his side and beginning to vomit. "Hung Jun, aren't you resistant to snake poison?" Li Jinglong asked worriedly, after he finished throwing up. "How are you doing?" Peacocks, phoenixes, and the golden-winged great peng were natural enemies of snakes to begin with, so ever since Hung Jun was born, he had been resistant to snake poisons. But this boss snake's poison was truly too vicious, and even Hung Jun couldn't hold out in the face of it. "It truly is, even harder to deal with than a dragon," Hung Jun said, panting. One of the pheasants said, "It's lived here for a very, very long time. It has several thousand years worth of cultivation." Such a huge snake, over 10 zhang long, with a body as wide as a street, meant that it might have cultivated for almost 3,000 years. Counting back through the years, this placed it at around the time of the Xia and Yu dynasties, or even further back to the time of the 5 emperors. It had cultivated for such a long time, and yet it hadn't transformed into a dragon yet. That snake poison was truly the pinnacle of all poisons in the world, and no Yao could boast any better. Li Jinglong had calmed down somewhat. Originally, he had gone there to scout, he hadn't expected to have startled the boss snake instead. As of now, the situation was at an impasse, and when he thought about it over and over, he blamed himself for it. Hung Jun, however, didn't care. He was only worried about Zhao Yun, who was still in the cavern. "Zhao Yun's hurt," Hung Jun said. "Who else is in there?" "Zhao Zilong's also inside and hasn't come out," Li Jinglong replied. Though the carp yao couldn't fight well, it was excellent at running for its life, so the two of them weren't worried. Li Jinglong searched his thoughts for a moment, before saying, "When was this Yaogui sealed away here? Why does the cliffside have a seal in the shape of a peacock on it? You just thought of that?" Fat Green scoffed. "Do you even have a brain?" Skinny Red replied, "Best ask for some help. Your minute abilities are really too tragic." Li Jinglong's chest had been filled with lofty ambitions. In the past few days, he had been bestowed a marquee title, set Li Hung to rights, selected the location of the Yao capital, and strengthened the exorcism department and done a good number of other things that went as well as could be. He thought that he had finally shaken off his eternally unlucky streak, only for the boss snake to give him the harsh blow of reality. He knew that he could not underestimate his enemies, otherwise he would die without even knowing how he died. "I've already asked for help," Li Jinglong said in reply. "Yangtze is probably on his way already." Right now, he was wishing that Morajin and Lu Su would be able to come and watch the chaos unfold as well, because even if Chu Yangtze arrived and the three of them joined forces, they might still not be able to defeat this boss snake. After resting for a while, Li Jinglong gathered his strength again, and he said, "Let's get going." The sky was already starting to brighten faintly, and the mountains were steeped in a layer of fog. Their surroundings were unnaturally silent, without even bird calls, which lent it an air of eerie stillness. "You're still going back there?" Fat Green asked. Hung Jun was a little hesitant. Should they wait for Chu Yangtze to arrive before acting, or should they scout out the situation first? Just now, they had tried to do so, and had realized that the blade of the glaive could harm that great snake, so they weren't completely unable to fight back against it. Waiting until everyone arrived before attacking would be safer, but Zhao Yun was stuck in that cave, and no one knew if he was still alive or dead, so how could he sit around and wait idly? Li Jinglong's suggestion had cemented his resolution, and Hung Jun nodded. Li Jinglong continued, "Do you have a way to contact the Yao Kings? Summon them all here." Before leaving, Qing Xiang had given Hung Jun a feather. Once the location of their new capital was selected, he was to gather the 4 Yao Kings there. Though Hung Jun didn't know how the Yao Kings had gotten in contact with each other before, and he also didn't know when they'd be able to arrive, he figured that he should summon them first. He stuck the feather into the ground, and the golden-winged great peng steel feather began to glow. Suddenly, a white gerfalcon flew out of the forest, its speed impossibly fast, and it picked up that steel feather in its beak as it flew high into the sky. "No matter what, it won't be harder to defeat than Mara," Li Jinglong said, taking a deep breath. "If we don't underestimate our enemy, we'll be able to at least fight it. Let's go." From behind, Hung Jun lifted Li Jinglong under the arms, bringing him along as they flew towards that cavern. The two of them peered inside, and Li Jinglong said, "There's a steep slope and it's covered in water, it'll be very slippery." Hung Jun slowly flew inside. After preparing himself, they entered the dark region. The fog that had spread through the mountain slowly rose upwards, and both the inside and the outside of the cavern were dark. "Don't move," Li Jinglong said quietly. "Check out the situation first." After their eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, Hung Jun found that the roof of the cavern was covered in a multitude of stalactites, so he carefully avoided them as he found a place to land. That was an even smaller cave, of a size that could only fit a single person. Beforehand, Li Jinglong had looked all around, but he hadn't found this little cave about 2 chi in size. There was even a platform in it. Hung Jun set Li Jinglong down on the platform, and the two of them both looked down. In this place, there was no more of the bright light that shone from outside into the cavern, but in the dim, dark cave, several rays of sunlight crisscrossed as they shone in, enough to see the entire scene. "Hey," Hung Jun pointed out quietly, "that big snake has space behind it as well." Li Jinglong agreed. "The insides of the Tianluo range are pretty big." This underground cavern was at least a good half of the size of Chengdu City, and the boss snake only took up the space at the entrance. Behind it was an even larger region, and an underground river snaked into the depths of the cavern, turning it into a strange other world. "Look down there," Li Jinglong said. Beneath the platform that the two of them were on was a rope, and the rope dangled down into the deepest part of the cavern. At the very bottom shone a dim, weak blue glow, an earth vein was flowing nearby, and many odd, glowing plants were growing there. "You too." Hung Jun and Li Jinglong were instantly frightened, but when they turned they found that Yu Zayun had arrived. Yu Zayun scrambled in from the hole outside, saying, "Wow, that's such a big one. How much did it have to eat to get to the size it is?" "Why did you only come now?" Hung Jun asked. "Where did you go?" "To the village that your dad spoke of," Yu Zayun replied unconcernedly, licking her claws as she did so. Hung Jun, "Wait. My dad came here before." "Yu Zayun, your dad liked to go play around everywhere whenever he had time. Isn't that very normal?" "Wait," Li Jinglong said. "What kind of a situation is this?" He thought of the peacock symbol outside the cavern, combined with the Yao subduing staff, then of where Morajin, Qiu Yangxi, and Atai were born. This did confirm their original guess. Hung Jun asked, "There's a village near here? Why didn't I find it?" "On the north side." "You guys came from the south side," Yu Zayun replied, setting her claw down and studying the inside of the cavern. "You were born in that village?" Hung Jun almost shouted out loud. Yu Zayun had evidently known Kong Xian in the past, but she hadn't been as close to him as Qing Xiang and Chongming had been. Back then, when Kong Xian and Yu Zayun had had an earnest conversation, Yu Zayun had wanted to shake off Wu Qiu. But Wu Qiu and Xiaoyu were holding onto something vital of hers, and she was unable to break free. So when Kong Xian had checked over Yang Yahuan, he had sealed Yu Zayun away in Yang Yahuan's body. Later, when he was wandering all around the world, he would check in on Yang Yahuan from time to time and borrow that excuse to check on Yu Zayun. Once, when he came back, the topic of whether or not Yang Yahuan could bear children came up, and it was then that Yu Zayun learned a little bit of what he had seen and heard in Bashu. Back then, Kong Xian had already met Jia Yuz. At first, Jia Yuz didn't know that she was bearing a devil child, but Kong Xian was very uneasy. He borrowed the excuse that he was a traveling doctor and led Jia Yuz around everywhere, trying in reality to find any medicine that could change the devil child she bore. Before Jia Yuz had married, she had once gained some advice from a wise sage, and that wise sage, without having revealed their name, simply told her that they hailed from the great lands of Bashu. When Jia Yuz was a child, she had an extraordinary physique. Rumor had it that she would constantly dream of things that had happened in her previous life, and it was only after a wise sage imparted their secrets upon her that her health gradually improved. After she got pregnant, she began to relapse, and Jia Yuz brought up her Shifu, hoping to be able to find them and see them once more before she gave birth. Naturally, Kong Xian knew that this condition was caused by the devil fetus. Upon seeing Jia Yuz weaken day by day, he understood clearly that he had to help her stabilize the devil fetus, in order to prevent the danger from being reflected onto the mother's body and thus harming his wife. He brought his wife into the Shu region, but just as they entered the mountains of Bashu and were resting there for a night, Jia Yuz, now 7 months pregnant, suddenly felt a terrible pain in her stomach. Kong Xian asked the locals, and then climbed up Tianluo mountain, seeking medicine for his wife. "Why would you go understand that?" Li Jinglong asked at this point in the story. Yu Zayun's reminiscence was interrupted by Li Jinglong. One of them was a fox, and the other was a foxily cunning human, so naturally they knew that there was no point in digging deeper. As soon as they touched upon what hadn't been said about that year, they probably would have dug out Kong Xian's feelings towards this child that he had yet to meet. The fetus's life, in Kong Xian's eyes, had evidently been less important than the mother's. If the child was gone, they could always have another, but if Jia Yuz died, there was no saving her. I also wanted to be a mother, is that very strange? Yu Zeyun replied easily. Because of us, Yang Yahuan inhabited a half-human, half-Yao body. Every one of the 3 times that she was with child, that sister of mine interfered, and she ended up giving birth to 3 inhuman monsters. Neither Li Jinglong nor Yu Zeyun spoke about what they were really thinking, and both of them fell silent for a while. Hung Jun, however, suddenly asked, if, when I was born, my dad threw me into this cavern to feed the snake, things might have ended up alright, wouldn't they? Yu Zeyun replied slowly, you are the reincarnation of Mara. Even if you were killed while you were still in swaddling clothes, the will of the heavens cannot be disobeyed, and other changes would have come about because of that. What is destined to be cannot be avoided. Furthermore, everything's already happened, and there's no point in wondering what might have been. Whether you're a Yao or a human, that doesn't matter. 100 years later, 1,000 years later, or even tens of thousands of years later, you will eventually die. Why not make your peace with that now? Hung Jun thought, that's true. Everything's already happening, and it can't be redone, so what point is there in discussing it? Later, according to the villagers, Kong Xian entered the Tianluo mountains to look for medicine for his wife, only to find the boss snake in the midst of the mountains. What came after that were things that Kong Xian did not mention to Yu Zeyun. When Yu Zeyun saw the grown-up Hung Jun, she knew that Kong Xian had successfully kept the child, and Jia Yus had also lived. No matter if he was a devil fetus or a Yao fetus, humans and Yao were destined to not be able to intermarry. Otherwise, why would Wenbin of Luoyang have been so heavily poisoned, despite loving the flower Yao and being loved in return? Loving each other was already a difficult thing to achieve, let alone giving birth to a child with mixed blood. With that, Yu Zeyun got the idea to seek out the truth behind how Kong Xian had managed to keep both Jia Yus and the child alive. Is it the medicine down there? Hung Jun asked quietly. Yu Zeyun shrugged. The 3 of them all held their breaths and looked that way. The darkness in the cavern gradually faded away, and amidst the earth vein's weak illumination, the boss snake coiled up, currently sound asleep. The Huashi, on the other hand, lay collapsed to one side like a beaten-up rope. Zhao Yun. Hung Jun called quietly. Zhao Yun had lost the ability to transform, and it wasn't clear if he was alive or dead. His wings were broken, and he lay there, unmoving. Li Jinglong looked at Yu Zeyun, who said, don't even think about it. It's too big, you won't be able to drag it away. How about I bring you all that staff? Yu Zeyun asked quietly. No, Li Jinglong replied decisively. You won't be able to take it? What the Yao subduing staff would decide was still a difficult issue. Technically speaking, this weapon should have been Hung Jun's, but Hung Jun had taken the Yao binding rope. If this counted as a switch, then the Yao subduing staff should go to Qiu Yangxi. Moreover, look, Li Jinglong said. The array has trapped the boss snake. This might be the reason that it hasn't been able to leave the Tianluo mountains all this time. If we take away the Yao subduing staff and the boss snake escapes, it is bound to wreak destruction across the lands of Shu, and they will know no peace. We must not act rashly. What Li Jinglong was thinking was waiting for Qiu Yangxi to lock this guy away in the tower first, then take the Yao subduing staff. Right now, saving Zhao Yun was more important. In that moment, a slightly glowing, dirt yellow being slowly crawled up the bank of the underground river. Zhao Zilong's still there. The Carpio pressed its hands against the ground, carefully crawling past the boss snake's side like a lizard. Whenever the boss snake shifted even a little, the Carpio would immediately lie down and play dead. After confirming that there was no danger, it continued to crawl along, towards the boss snake. I have an idea, Li Jinglong said. Bring the Yao binding rope out. Hung Jun and Yu Zeyun stopped in their planning. Yu Zeyun then leaped off the platform, her fox paws making absolutely no sound as she approached the Carpio. The Carpiao turned to look, only to see Li Jinglong and Hung Jun on the platform, beckoning to it. Yu Zayun then brought one end of the Yao binding rope to it, and the Carpiao crawled over very slowly, tying the Yao binding rope to Zhao Yun's body. The Huashi was still breathing. It was evidently not dead yet, but it had been injured very heavily. From their high vantage point, Hung Jun, under Li Jinglong's direction, began to pull the rope back, slowly dragging Zhao Yun along the ground right past the sleeping boss snake. Snakes used their scales to sense the vibrations of the earth, and if their movements were too large, then they would alert the boss snake. As he was dragged along, Zhao Yun got stuck between some stalagmites. His head knocked against them twice, and the Carpiao hurried forward to help. Instantly, the boss snake's eyes opened by a slit, shining suddenly towards where the Yao binding rope was coming from. In that moment, Hung Jun couldn't hold back his magic, and the Yao binding rope began to glow. As soon as the Yao binding rope glowed, the Yao subduing staff in the middle of the array also began to glow. Li Jinglong thought to himself, damn. Now the boss snake would be even more wary, but just as he was about to turn his head and inform them, Yu Zayun turned and leaped onto the boss snake's body, suddenly opening her eyes wide. A burst of magic power traveled between the Fox King and the boss snake. The boss snake had yet to fully open its eyes, and the light within them faded slightly. With this extra moment they won, Li Jinglong hurriedly said, quick. The Carpiao grabbed the Huashi, and Hung Jun immediately pulled the rope back. The Huashi was swiftly pulled upwards. All the fur over Yu Zayun's body stood on end as she used all her might, but she only lasted for a single instant before giving out. She retreated swiftly, pulling her magic back. The boss snake was awake. End chapter. Tianbao Fu Yao Lu. Chapter 192. Ancient Grudges from the Long-Distant Past. The boss snake roared as it came charging towards Yu Zayun. Just as they were about to rescue the Huashi, they were also on the brink of losing another one of their other members. Li Jinglong shouted, loud and clear, listen to my orders. Get down. In the span of a short few moments, Li Jinglong realized that the Yao binding rope's magic could resonate with the Yao subduing staff, so he and Hung Jun immediately jumped down, dashing right in front of the boss snake. Wrap the rope around its mouth. Li Jinglong shouted resolutely. Hung Jun tossed out the Yao binding rope, and the boss snake turned its attention away from Yu Zayun in favor of leaping at the two of them. Li Jinglong ignited the heart lamp, making it shine as brightly as it could. When that light shone on the boss snake's eyes, it immediately reared back and let out a roar. Hung Jun had been waiting for this exact moment, and he immediately pulled back the Yao binding rope that filled the air. The Yao binding rope tightened, coiling tightly around the boss snake's head, pulling ever tighter and tighter. Snakes, crocodiles, lizards, and other crawling creatures had a bite force of several thousand jin, but the strength they had to open their mouths was limited. In the past, when Li Jinglong had been running training exercises in the wilderness, they had practiced how to pinch a snake's mouth shut so as to avoid being harmed by a venomous snake. Last night, after their attempt failed, he thought this method over carefully, and as expected, it was coming in handy now. The Yao binding rope bound the boss snake, leaving it with no way to open its mouth, so it had no choice but to roll and squirm wildly, banging loudly through the cavern as it thrashed about. Hung Jun combined his four throwing knives into one, and Li Jinglong shouted, pin its tail down. Li Jinglong didn't want to kill this spiritual being that was some thousands of years old, he simply wanted to restrain it for the time being. The boss snake came charging towards Hung Jun, so Li Jinglong dashed forward, protecting Hung Jun with the heart lamp. It shone so brightly that the boss snake's eyes were dazzled, and its body swiped past the two of them to slam into the cavern instead. Kong Xian. Hung Jun froze. Li Jinglong immediately sensed the danger, and he shouted, get it under control first. But in the moment that Hung Jun swung the blade down, that silhouette suddenly appeared in front of him, pressing one palm to Hung Jun's forehead. The moment that they touched, Hung Jun suddenly realized this person's identity, the boss snake's primordial spirit. Li Jinglong had no more time to spare for shouting. He called upon the heart lamp, and a bright light roared forth towards Hung Jun. In terms of subduing and fighting Yao, the heart lamp's efficacy was weak. Unless they were Yaogui corrupted by devil chi, it wouldn't have much of an effect. But as soon as their opponent appeared as a primordial soul, a ghostly spirit, or some other non-physical form, the heart lamp was the natural enemy of all intangible spiritual forms. Hung Jun was instantly filled with a sea's worth of scenes. Jia Yu's face was filled with sorrow as she stood guard by the boss snake's side. Li Jinglong then blasted away the boss snake's primordial soul in a single blow. Hung Jun instinctively lifted the glaive, but it was already too late. The boss snake had managed to get a moment's rest, and the snake's body came whipping towards them, sending Hung Jun flying. The boss snake then twisted its body, and the glaive went flying, stabbing into the ground. With a roll, Li Jinglong moved to pick up the glaive, but the boss snake's thick body thrashed about, sending the glaive flying even further away. Hung Jun then tried to disengage and fly into the air to save Li Jinglong, but found himself surrounded by this huge black snake's body in all directions, and it tightened around them. The snake's body rolled over until Li Jinglong was crushed beneath it. From behind, Hung Jun reached out a hand. All around them, above and below, was this snake's body, and in that moment, the coils tightened, binding the two of them together. Hung Jun said, "I saw. Li Jinglong, we need to figure out a way to escape first." Li Jinglong knew that huge pythons were very hard to deal with, and if they got caught in its coils, it would be extremely hard for them to escape. But it was already too late. The boss snake had solidly coiled around the two of them, and they found themselves back to back, with no way to move about. Hung Jun tried to lift his hands several times, but he couldn't call up the pentacolor sacred light. Li Jinglong. Hung Jun. The boss snake's body tightened more and more. Its snake head turned towards them, and its icy cold body felt like a wall of steel, crushing their chests. Hung Jun couldn't help but take large gulps of air, but his chest still hurt greatly. Li Jinglong crooked one finger, reaching back to write a few words on Hung Jun's leg. Lure its primordial spirit out. How was he supposed to lure it out? Hung Jun's chest hurt from the constriction, and he had to get out the pentacolor sacred light in order to drag the glaive back to him. The boss snake's head was still trapped by the Yao binding rope, and it couldn't open its mouth, yet it could still make noise. "Are you looking for this?" The jade peacock plume then slowly rose into the air, glowing with a gentle light. The boss snake's eyes studied Hung Jun. Each of its eyes was almost a house in size, and its pupils narrowed to slits, glowing with a vicious light. Li Jinglong gently patted Hung Jun's leg. Hung Jun immediately calmed, sensing that the boss snake seemed to have something to say. "I know you," Hung Jun said. "Boss snake." Li Jinglong let out a shout of glee in his heart. Hung Jun was evidently becoming smarter and smarter. "Kong Xian's odious spawn," the boss snake said, coldly looking at Hung Jun. "If you looked more like Yao Ji, I might have spared you today. But you, devil child. Where has the devil seed within you gone?" Li Jinglong's heart skipped a beat at that. He didn't know how the boss snake had figured out Hung Jun's identity. It could be that the Yao tribes had a special way of identifying each other. In Hangzhou, Qiu Qiu had spoken of Yao Ji's past, but Hung Jun didn't know about it. And as expected, Hung Jun asked, his expression one of puzzlement, "Who's Yao Ji?" The boss snake's head turned, studying Li Jinglong and Hung Jun. The pair of them were bound tightly, and they couldn't move at all. Li Jinglong said solemnly, "Yao Ji is your mom." "How did you know?" Hung Jun was stunned. In this moment, at such a time, in such a situation, the events of the past managed to draw his attention, and for a time he forgot the dire danger they were in. Li Jinglong replied calmly, "Qiu Qiu told me." Why does he know about my mom and dad? Now is not the time to speak of this. You've been keeping this from me the entire time. Shut up, the boss snake raged. Being ignored had infuriated it, and it wrapped its body a little tighter. Hung Jun felt as if his ribs were about to be squished into his lungs, and he struggled a little, painfully. The boss snake continued. This face, these features, Mahamayuri. It was you, who took Yao Ji away. Hung Jun suddenly opened his eyes wide, saying, You. He remembered now. The scene that he had seen the moment that the boss snake's primordial soul struck him was that of his own mother at the boss snake's side. You too. Correct, the boss snake said slowly, its eyes filled with hatred. I gave up my chance to turn into a dragon. It has been 3,000 years. I did that solely to keep your mother safe for these past 3,000 years. But Yao Ji left me just like that. She returned to the cycles of reincarnation. Once she bore the devil fetus in her body, your mother even had the face to bring your father back and ask me for help. In that moment, all of what had happened in the past, and the reasons for them, grew clear. Li Jinglong immediately caught onto the clues at hand, and he said darkly, This isn't fair, boss snake. After Yao Ji returned to the cycles of reincarnation, she might not have remembered the events of her past lives. You, Hung Jun's voice trembled. Did you wait for her for a long time? I thought that there would come a day when she would return, the boss snake said slowly. Odious spawn, odious spawn. Li Jinglong harshly jabbed Hung Jun with a finger, and he swiftly wrote the words, Great Sage. Hung Jun immediately understood, for some reason, he actually understood Li Jinglong's complicated meaning. He frowned. When my mother was alive, she mentioned that she once had a shifu. When the boss snake heard those words, it suddenly widened its eyes. She mentioned me. The boss snake's voice had also begun to tremble slightly. Hung Jun studied the boss snake and he suddenly felt a swell of powerful sympathy grow in his heart. But with the situation that he and Li Jinglong found themselves in, if they didn't get out of danger fast, the boss snake would likely not let them be. Yes, Hung Jun said, pushing forward. They were a middle-aged person. At the same time, the far wall of the cavern glimmered. Out of the corner of his eye, Li Jinglong saw that Qiu Yangxi was standing up on the high ground, holding a mirror in his hand. It reflected the sunlight from outside the cavern and directed it towards them, right behind the boss snake. As soon as a helper arrived, Li Jinglong immediately had a handle on the situation. The boss snake's gaze, however, changed a bit, and its snake head glowed with a weak light as the primordial soul left its body, transforming into a young, lithe assassin wearing scale armor. Hung Jun. That young assassin's face was filled with resentment as they looked towards Hung Jun. They lifted a hand that was glowing with a weak light, revealing a snake fang dagger, saying darkly, What did she say about me? Originally, Li Jinglong wanted to hear a little more, but he knew that Hung Jun had never been well practiced at lying. Furthermore, this boss snake was evidently ready to kill them, and would never let them go and celebrate the next year in peace. As soon as it learned what it wanted to, it would definitely kill them. Opportunities had to be grasped at the soonest possibility, and time that passed would never return, so he immediately activated the power of the heart lamp. He only had one chance. The moment that Li Jinglong struck forth with all his strength, the heart lamps might instantly exploded, forming chaotic eddies. Even he himself had never realized that making it explode after gathering all that energy would have such a powerful effect. All Hung Jun saw was a flash of bright light before his eyes, and he almost lost his sight from how bright that flash was. In the blink of an eye, Qiu Yangxi soundlessly leaped down from high above, spreading out a stack of talismans. Get the glaive! Li Jinglong shouted. When Hung Jun was freed, he immediately called the glaive back to him. The boss snake rolled and thrashed about, its huge body sweeping past. Qiu Yangxi shouted, Call your primordial spirit back. Stop fighting. Li Jinglong had used the heart lamp to call his 307 Po out of his body in order to fight the boss snake's primordial spirit, which was basically having one spirit fight it out against another. Though the boss snake's primordial spirit was no match for him, if it managed to get in a stab in its death throes and hurt Li Jinglong's Hunpo, that injury would be quite serious. The cavern was immediately thrown into chaos, and Hung Jun, both his hands wrapped around the glaive, hesitated. Qiu Yangxi shouted angrily, "Hung Jun! Attack! Everyone's lives are more important." Within the exorcism department, the person who understood Hung Jun the best after Li Jinglong was Qiu Yangxi. Sometimes, Qiu Yangxi's guesses about Hung Jun were even more accurate than Li Jinglong's. When he overheard the conversation from up high, Qiu Yangxi knew that Hung Jun would have this moment of hesitation. However, the boss snake was truly too powerful, far above any of the evil Jiao he had faced before. Its power could even be considered higher than that of the dragon tribe. Moreover, it was filled with hatred for the group, especially for Kong Xian's descendant, so it would kill even more happily in cold blood. If Hung Jun waited any longer, the outcome would be unimaginable. At the same time, Li Jinglong pulled his primordial spirit back. Hung Jun's blow swept forth, the point of his blade passing right by, splitting the scales of the boss snake's body down the side. Instantly, fresh blood spurted forth. The boss snake pulled its primordial spirit back, turned over, and immediately charged towards Hung Jun. This ancient, cunning Yao snake, in that single moment, had already determined who was the most dangerous of them. Qiu Yangxi shouted in response, "Watch out!" Hung Jun stood firm and swung a second time. That second blow shot towards the boss snake, but just as it was about to hit the boss snake and split it into two, the boss snake's head came darting towards them, and its tail swept towards the center of the array, coiling around the Yao binding rope. Its entire body began to glow with a bright blue light. The moment the blue light glowed, Li Jinglong realized that the boss snake was drawing on the earth veins. This was not good, and he shouted, "Retreat!" Hung Jun's glaive swung forth, but the boss snake bursting with blue light actually used the power of the earth veins to block this blow. The divine and earthly veins were an ancient and primordial power in this world, and the saying went, "The heavens and the earth are a forge, and evolution is the creator." All of the magic and weapons in this world, under the power of the earth veins, would be melted into useless steel. Hung Jun had never met a Yaoguai that could defend against the glaive's power. The boss snake gathered up the energy from the earth vein, and it then sent up a whirlwind, sending them all flying outwards. The boss snake's full force blow sent Qiu Yangxi, Li Jinglong, and Hung Jun flying in three different directions. The energy in Hung Jun's chest roiled, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Li Jinglong's heart lamp was instantly overpowered, and he forcefully tried to gather up energy. Qiu Yangxi was originally trying to send out the flying talismans. As soon as they plastered themselves to the boss snake's body, they would be able to send it through time and space, right into the dragon subduing tower. But as soon as the power of the earth veins came out, the talismans all burned to ash, and his efforts were in vain. Li Jinglong and Hung Jun slammed into the stone stalactites, falling to the ground. The boss snake then came charging towards them again. In this moment, the earth vein's power was being forcefully absorbed into the array, before it all then flowed into the boss snake's body, and the boss snake's body began to burn. In order to defend against the glaive's power, the boss snake ignored all consequences and forcefully pulled the flow of the earth vein into its own body. It bore the pain of this energy burning away its insides and its primordial soul, wanting to kill them even as it died. Due to the influence of the energy flow, the array began to revolve. As if they had sensed the danger of this huge beast beginning to escape its bonds, the stalactites on the ceiling began to fall in twos and threes, sending out several thunderous booms. Hung Jun and Li Jinglong were trapped behind the stalactites, and Hung Jun's vision flickered in and out. He had poured all he had into that single slice earlier, and had used up all the magic in his body, so he found himself unable to gather his strength for the time being. The cave's going to collapse. Qiu Yangxi shouted. What should we do? Li Jinglong's face was streaked with blood. The energy, due to the boss snake's agitation, was shooting wildly in all directions. The stalactites hanging from the roof of the cavern were all breaking, and they came crashing down in a thunderous boom one by one. Hung Jun raised his voice and shouted, "Rise!" The pentacolor sacred light then expanded outwards, instantly holding up the cavern. Hung Jun, however, fell right to his knees under the weight. Li Jinglong roared, "Pull the Yao subduing staff out!" Qiu Yangxi turned and raced towards the array. The boss snake followed closely behind, but Li Jinglong dashed over and blocked it from continuing towards Qiu Yangxi, his hands glowing with bright light as he shone them towards the boss snake's eyes. The boss snake's eyes were dazzled by that, and it turned its head away, sweeping Li Jinglong away. But in that same moment, Qiu Yangxi dashed into the center of the array and grabbed the Yao subduing staff, which still had the snake's tail coiled around it. End chapter.